Hi, I'm your host, Angela Harrell. This podcast is brought to you by the 100 Club of Arizona, a nonprofit organization that supports public safety. And we are excited to bring these stories to you because many people want to hear them. And we think it's important that you have a glimpse inside the day-to-day activities that our law enforcement officers and firefighters face on a regular basis. Welcome to the Call Podcast. Hi, I'm Angela Harrell, and I'm here today with the beautiful Autumn Barber, who has a pretty incredible story to share with us, and hopefully we can all take away something amazing from her words. Yesterday was the 6-year anniversary of your husband's death, and obviously this month, that particular day presents challenges. I know that as well as you do. So, despite all of that, you chose to come in. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It's really our pleasure. And I don't know if when you got married to your late husband, you ever thought you would be part of this family. But the public safety family is huge. And hopefully they never go away. But I want you to tell us a little bit about how did you meet Tim?
So Tim and I met through a mutual friend, 10, almost 11 years ago. And I think I kind of pursued him. I just saw him sitting there and there was no purse next to him. And I just sat down and made myself comfortable. And he later would tell me he couldn't believe I was talking to him. He was several years older than me, and apparently that was a lot bigger in his mind than it was in my mind. Mm-hmm. He had a daughter at the time who was 15, and so that was kind of a new and exciting experience to me. And truly watching their love for each other and the relationship that they had was enormous in me falling in love with Tim, just seeing what a great dad he was and how involved he was and how much he loved his daughter.
That's remarkable. Now, did you meet him here in Arizona?
I did. He was an Arizona native. I'm a transplant from Illinois, but he lived here his whole life. He grew up in Tempe and then eventually decided to become a police officer. He had a long career in grocery and worked for Abco Foods for a number of years, 16 years, I believe, becoming the youngest store director that they ever had. And when Abco closed, he was hired on to do some consulting work, and he started thinking about where life was going to lead him next. And he had a buddy that he had grown up with on LaDonna Drive who had gone on to become a Tempe police officer, and another friend who had gone on to become a Chandler officer. And both of them separately started kind of putting a bug in his ear and saying, hey, you're made for this. Would be a great career path for you. It's customer service on, a much different level. And you would be really good at it. And so he started looking into it and actually, I believe, interviewed with both Tempe and Chandler, eventually, settling on going to work for Tempe. And wow. Yeah, the rest is history. He loved his job more than anyone else I've ever known.
That's pretty incredible. So was he an officer when you met him?
He was.
Okay. So you knew what you're getting yourself into.
Well, sort of. I mean, I didn't know the ins and outs of it. I didn't have any friends who were officers or, spouses of officers. So I didn't. I mean, I knew what any person on the street knows. I didn't know the ins and outs of it. And it was a couple years in when I kind of came to the realization of this blue brotherhood. You hear these cliche terms thrown around. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get it until there was a guy Tim worked with who had a son with a debilitating illness. And Tim said to me, hey, there's this thing going on. It's on our anniversary. Do you want to go? And I said, sure. Yeah, whatever it is, we'll go. And it was at Tempe Mission Palms, and it was this enormous event, this huge benefit that members of the department had put on to help out this family. And that's when it really clicked for me. This is just what we do.
That's beautiful.
We take care of each other.
That's pretty special. So you had to learn your way around the culture, so to speak. So you got married after, I assumed you got married, yeah.
Yes, we did.
And how many years were you married?
We were not even married 2 years, about a year and a half. So we were together for several years, and Tim had decided that he was going to propose. My best friend was a jeweler, and he had her make this ring for me.
How convenient.
I know. It worked out very well for him. And he gave the ring to my mom for safekeeping because he knew that if it was in our house, he would propose on a whim. And while my mom had that ring, Tim was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And that all moved very fast. His treatments moved very fast. We had a wonderful team of doctors who cared for him, but things progressed quickly. The proposal did not go off how he wanted it to or when he wanted it to. Everything in our lives was put on hold while we waited for him to conquer this cancer. And during that time, it wasn't a priority. And it wasn't until his health was kind of under control that that became a priority, and he proposed, and we had a lovely wedding. And
Beautiful.
yeah,
Beautiful. Now, you said when you met him, he had a 15-year-old daughter.
he did.
And did you ultimately have children with Tim?
I did. So Tim and I, because of his cancer, had to go through some pretty intense things to become pregnant.
Sure.
And back in May of 2011, we learned that we were pregnant with twins.
Oh, my goodness. That's so exciting.
We were very excited, and it was really hard to keep that secret until it was an appropriate time to share. But we were able to, share that news with both of our families for Father's Day that year.
Oh.
And of course, celebrate Tim being a father already and his increased upcoming fatherhood.
Sure, of course. Now, I'm curious because, the anticipation and being pregnant, did you have any details of the pregnancy?
All we knew was it was twins. It was a high-risk pregnancy, and we had one emergency ultrasound that we did, and the ultrasound tech was not going to give us any information. I was asking her, can you tell us the genders? And she said, no, I can't tell you. And I thought quickly, and I said, well, can you tell us, are they the same or are they different? And before I finished my sentence, she said, they're different.
How exciting.
So we knew it was a boy and a girl, most probably. There was always
Wow.
a chance that, what she was seeing wasn't correct because it was
Sure.
early on. But we had on fairly good authority that it was a boy and a girl.
I love that. But what a blessing,
Total
for you,
blessing.
despite his physical challenges that he was having, his health condition, and you having to go through all of the things that it takes to become pregnant, especially with twins. That's a lot on you guys. You said that it was a high-risk pregnancy anyway.
Mm-hmm.
My question for you is, was it complicated in any other particular way?
It was complicated by the fact that Tim became ill fairly early on in the pregnancy. Tim was undergoing all these different treatments, and one of them was a brand new treatment that truthfully the medical community didn't have a lot of information on. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of side effects that were kind of unexplainable and untreatable, and he was struggling. For the first time since his diagnosis, he made it through surgery, through chemotherapy, through radiation, without any complication. But this new treatment was very difficult on him, and being his caregiver was strenuous, physically, mentally, emotionally, and it was probably challenging for the pregnancy to be a caregiver at that time.
Well, and you are busy creating life, and you have 2 babies, not just one. And that has to, did you both have morning sickness at the same time is what I want to know.
Ironically, I didn't have a whole lot of morning sickness, but Tim had an enormous amount of nausea. I think that the Lord just kind of took it easy on me, knowing that he had so much that he needed.
Yes, of course. So, this story progresses, mm-hmm. and this is where it becomes maybe a little sad.
Yeah. Definitely things were not going well. By August, Tim was very weak. I was still in the first trimester of the pregnancy. The department was starting to pull together and ask, what can we do? How can we help? and somebody decided they would have a little barbecue benefit for Tim to help out with some of his medical expenses.
Isn't it kind of crazy that here you were on your anniversary, not that long before, supporting another family who was having a challenge, and now the department has turned around to support you?
It was a full circle moment. Absolutely. I remember that morning, the morning of the barbecue, I needed to take Tim up to North Scottsdale for a blood transfusion. And it was going to be a challenging day. They didn't want us to leave. The hospital staff wanted us to stay there, and we made the decision to still go to the barbecue. So when we walked in, there were hundreds of people packed into this police station, and they all stood up and were applauding Tim. There was news channels there. They were interviewing him. It's such an overwhelming moment to just feel so loved and so cared for by all these people. And looking around, there were officers from all over the valley. It wasn't just Tempe, and it wasn't just police officers. There were firefighters. There was all kinds of public safety servants there. And we stayed briefly, and I had to get Tim back to the hospital. And what we didn't know was that that was the last time anybody was going to see him, because when we went back to the hospital, he never came home.
How much time did he spend in the hospital?
That was the afternoon. He made it a day and a half.
Goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And here you are, pregnant with twins.
Right.
And you are in the process of losing your husband.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tim and I never thought negatively. His nickname was Mr. Optimistic. Everyone called him Mr. Optimistic. Any situation that he was placed in, he always saw the bright side. He always saw the way out. He always came out on the other side. And it's as if it never truly entered our minds that he could die. We thought he had beat cancer once. He would beat it over and over and over again. And when the cancer came back, we didn't let it slow us down. He didn't let it slow him down. And I was taken aback when I realized what was going on, and it was not even 48 hours before he died when I realized this might be it.
Wow. So you were at the hospital with him during this time?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Were there a lot of other people there to support you, or did you just need that time by yourself with him?
No, his mom and dad were there. His siblings were there. His daughter, of course, was there. His daughter was 20 at the time, and we were an enormous support to each other, I think. We never broke down at the same time. We kind of took turns melting down and supporting each other. She helped me make all of the decisions that were coming. His parents helped me make some of the decisions that were coming. There are things that you don't really think about as a spouse, even as a spouse of a police officer, because while you have in your mind every time your husband walks out the door, this might be the last time you kiss them goodbye because they're going to work, you don't necessarily think about illness being what will take them. That's just not something that enters your mind, especially as young as we were. Mm-hmm. You know, he was 42, I was 31. I certainly expected to be spending that time in my life planning a nursery, not planning a funeral.
Absolutely. And at 31 years old, you don't know how to plan a funeral.
I had no idea even where to begin. Tim's grandma was there. She was in her 90s and had planned funerals.
Sure.
And she guided me a little bit. But that was, again, where the police department stepped up and sent people to help me. A friend of ours whose husband was a Chandler officer got in touch with the 100 Club. Everything is a blur from that week, but I believe it was the next day someone showed up at my door with a check from the 100 Club, which helped me pay for his funeral.
Isn't that crazy?
I wasn't expecting to pay for a funeral.
No.
I didn't even know what a funeral entailed
Right.
or what a person paid for.
Yeah, you were planning on buying diapers and,
Right.
you know, swings to keep them quiet and all of those things.
Right.
I admire your strength, and clearly Mr. Optimistic rubbed off on you because you seem like an incredibly positive person. And you say that week everything was a blur, but I'm sure that blur, that fog, stayed in place for some time.
Quite some time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to describe, and it's hard to come out of. There are still occasions where somebody will mention something to me from when they came to the hospital or the week of his funeral, and I have no recollection of it whatsoever. It's the strangest thing. It's like, you know, your mind just insulates you.
Yeah. And I think it protects you. Mm-hmm. It protects you so that you can focus on your unborn children and that you can get through that very challenging time.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that the department was there for you and that you were able to get some resources, because that is a challenge. At 31, I mean, it's not like you have a little special savings account of, you know, on a rainy day. This is not a rainy day. This is a thunderstorm, hurricane situation, and you don't know how you're probably going to pay your bills, let alone pay for a funeral and raise 2 children. And when were you due? So he passed away in August.
He passed away in August, and the pregnancy was as wonderful as it could possibly be, experiencing a pregnancy without one's husband. But the children were born healthy at the end of January, and they were 7 pounds and 7 pounds 1 ounce.
Wow.
So that's very, very healthy for twins.
Definitely.
And I'd had a complicated pregnancy up until the time that Tim passed away, including the morning that he died. There were complications in the pregnancy. From that day forward, there was never another complication. And I've often said, I don't know, but Tim was a very good negotiator, and I can just imagine him negotiating and saying, that's fine, I'll go now, but you have to make sure my babies are healthy.
I love it. Yeah, what more could you ask for? That they have their own little guardian angel, and as do you.
Absolutely.
To guide you and see you through these very tough days, months, weeks, years ahead.
Yes.
So, what was it like to go into labor without him there?
It was horrifying. I tried not to have a lot of expectations about the birth or a birth plan per se, because I knew that, especially with twins, there were a lot of things that were outside my control, and that those things would be under the control of my doctors and the babies themselves. And going in, I labored for 26 hours before I ended up with an emergency C-section. But I had Tim's wedding ring on a chain around my neck that I had worn from the day he died, and I'd never taken it off. And when they were taking me into the operating room to perform the C-section, they wanted me to take that off. And I remember distinctly saying, no, I'm not going to take it off, and arguing. And it was an emergency situation, so they really needed to get me in there. So we agreed that I could hold it in my hand. And so I had his wedding band slipped over one of my fingers that I was holding as the kids were born. And my mom was in there with me. You can only have one person in an operating room. She was there with me, and the first baby was born. And I had told her, no matter what happens, stay with the babies. I'll be fine. And they took the first baby out, and then I realized my mom was not there to hold my hand, and they were pulling the second baby out. And I made the anesthesiologist hold my hand, and I'm pretty sure that he thought I was a crazy person. But everything in that moment was so calm and so planned, and I knew that Tim was watching us and knew that everything was going to be okay.
It's a beautiful thing, and I am so glad that you stuck to it and kept his ring in your hand because, that's what you need in those moments. And if it's all you have, it is the most important thing.
And if he couldn't hold my hand, at least I could hold the ring from his hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a beautiful thing. Well, fast forward just a couple years, and you have two beautiful, healthy children. Truly different sexes. You have one boy and one girl.
Yes, they actually were. She was right.
And you had mentioned right before we started here today that they just started kindergarten.
They did.
How was the first day of kindergarten for you, Mom?
It was good. I think I did pretty well. Leading up to kindergarten, it's challenging always, and still filling out that paperwork because the paperwork from the schools always says mother's name and information, father's name and information. And I do choose to continue to honor Tim and put his information in there and write that he's deceased. And I think that helps the kids too, where they're going into a situation where people know their background and understand kind of the ins and outs of their daily life, because their dad is somebody that they talk about frequently, and it can get hard to explain if people don't know right off the bat.
Oh, absolutely. You had mentioned that we actually live in a similar part of town.
Yes.
And that your husband happens to be buried there in South Chandler. And so do you take your kids there?
Absolutely. Yeah, the kids, I've taken them there since they were little bitty babies, and they're 5 now. So it's someplace that they're very familiar with. They're not uncomfortable in the cemetery at all. We go to Hobby Lobby and get flowers, and my kids will tell the cashier, "These are for my daddy." And sometimes that creates an awkward exchange with the cashier.
I bet it does.
But we go down and we take care of his gravesite, and he's buried in a part of the cemetery that's dedicated to people who are in public service. So there's a lot of other officers that are buried around Tim, and my kids know those guys, whether they actually know them or not, which they didn't know any of them, but they've developed a relationship with them because they're at their graves too.
Yeah, they know their story. I'm sure you share them back and forth.
They do, and when they're running around the cemetery, my son has one Chandler officer that he likes to take care of his grave, and he likes to dust off his headstone and arrange things nicely and make sure everything's taken care of.
What a great little young man.
He is. He is. He is his father's son through and through.
So we all have different ways of remembering our loved ones that have passed. Is there anything special that you currently do or have done, either with your kids or on your own, to remember Tim and honor his memory?
One of the things that I do to honor Tim is I have a 100 Club license plate on my minivan, and the plate is XOXO Tim.
Perfect.
And the meaning behind that is actually something that not very many people know. So being a law enforcement spouse, there are times when your husband can get held over at work, and it can be unnerving because you know that they're supposed to be off work, you haven't heard from them, and you can start playing these horrible scenarios through your head. And so early on, Tim and I came up with an agreement, and it was the 1 hour rule. So within an hour of when he was supposed to get off, I just needed him to send me a quick text acknowledging that he was okay. And this was long before iPhones or even Blackberries, when we had flip phones. And you had to push a number multiple times to create a letter to make a text.
I think it's T9 or something.
Yeah,
what it
T9
used to be.
texting.
Most people won't even know what that is. But.
Yes. And XOXO was what he would send me. And XOXO just meant everything's okay, I'm fine, and I'll call you as soon as I can. And then I would just text him back, XOXO, and that meant, I understand.
We're good.
I'll talk to you then.
He bought himself another hour at that point.
Yes, yeah. Multiple hours, as many hours as needed at that point. But just within an hour, XOXO, to let me know everything's okay and I don't need to worry.
That's incredible. And it's great that you continue to do that and share that message, your little message, with the world. So I love it. The next sequential question would be, have you been able to date again or find love again?
I have, actually. A mutual friend introduced me to a guy that we had gone to high school with, who I never knew. And he and I began dating. and we just got married this last spring.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So we're very happy. We've got a blended family of Tim's and my 2 5-year-olds, and then he has 3 sons who are 15, 13, and 9.
Wow.
So we've got quite the full house.
Yes, you do. Almost a full Brady Bunch there.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many boys in the family. We always tease the boys and say maybe we'll have triplet girls to even out the numbers. I don't think that is likely.
Yeah.
Jason is my second husband's name, and he's very respectful of Tim and Tim's place in our family and in our history. And, Tim is a topic of conversation with even my stepchildren, just because he is a part of our family.
Yeah, and will forever be.
Absolutely.
And how is your relationship with the department? Do you still have a relationship with Tempe Police Department?
I do. I still talk to several of Tim's friends and squad mates that he was close to. And they kind of keep up on us, and I know that one of his friends I'm friends with on Facebook asked if he could share some of the pictures from the kids' first day of school. Oh. And so those kind of went around the department, and it's funny, you don't realize how much time has passed sometimes until you see things like those babies starting kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And I know that was, an incredibly hard situation for people in the department as well as his family. Nobody wants to see someone that they love and they work with every day and they care for suffer in the ways that he was suffering. Mm-hmm. And to know that he had a daughter with whom he had such a close relationship and had these 2 babies on the way, that just really magnified the sadness of the situation.
Well, and I think that we have a high level of expectation of our officers, our firefighters, our public safety in general. And, I've often said that they're wearing this bulletproof vest, they're wearing this badge, and you're not supposed to be able to see beyond that, to see who they really are and what's really going on. They're not allowed to be weak. And when a department faces a loss like this, a loss that can happen to any one of them, and it doesn't matter how hard you train, it doesn't matter how strong you are, these things happen to people. And I think it's hard for the officers to face the reality of their mortality, especially through an illness.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, it impacts spouses, it impacts families. It does anytime we lose somebody with whom we can relate. The officers that he worked with were able to see themselves in him. And yeah, I think you're right. It exposes your own mortality when you watch someone else die.
It does. So, to make it a little lighter, I'm sure he came home and told you stories and things like that, and of course, avoiding anything that's pending litigation. What is your favorite story that he came home and told you? I mean, you were a spouse, you were a law enforcement spouse, which is the most compromising position you could sometimes ever be in. So, what is your favorite story that he told, or how you were involved in it?
There's so many. And Tim was an open book to an extent where I've talked to other law enforcement spouses who have shared that their spouse doesn't always tell them what's going on day in and day out. Tim was kind of the opposite, where he wanted to come home at the end of the day and spend 10 minutes or 2 hours getting out everything that happened that day and kind of decompressing and, I guess, debriefing everything that had occurred. And sometimes it was because it was a horrible tragedy. Other times it was because it was something funny, or as a detective, it was something that he was mulling over in his mind, and sometimes it helped him to talk it out. He could see a different side, or I could give him a little bit of input that sometimes would go back and help him on the job.
So you were the ultimate sounding board.
I guess so. Yeah. I didn't know I was signing up to be that exactly, but yeah, I was. And there were a lot of good stories. I think one that was particularly meaningful was one day there was a vehicle that was abandoned in front of a convenience mart. Somebody had called it in for a welfare check. There was a gentleman slumped over behind the wheel, and Tim went to check on it, and the man was non-responsive to him knocking on the window. And he looked in and saw that the vehicle was in drive. So he carefully opened the door, leaned over, put the vehicle in park, and this gentleman was incredibly intoxicated. And Tim ended up arresting him on, I think it was his third extreme DUI.
Goodness.
It was very, it was not good for him. Little did I know, months later, this gentleman wrote a letter to the police department talking about Tim, talking about the respect and care that Tim showed him that day, how he made sure that he was taken care of, that he wasn't judged or prosecuted or made to feel less than. And in turn, this gentleman ended up going through an AA program, getting sober, and he truly thanks Tim for impacting his life in that way. There were more letters in Tim's file, commendation letters from people he arrested than I've ever heard of before.
And that says so much about his character, because often when, the citizens out there, they see police officers, they think, oh, they're going to give me a ticket, and then they blame the officer, but guess what? You were speeding, And
Right.
This gentleman, as an example, obviously extremely intoxicated and had quite the battle in front of him, but yet said thank you, because that intervention ultimately led him to a great place.
Yeah.
Pretty special.
Very special.
We here just think you're amazing. I have goosebumps earlier when you're telling me you're part of your story, and I hope that you keep telling that story, because I think that you're affecting the lives of many, many people.
I think so too. Tim told me the day he was diagnosed with cancer, we were driving down the 101, and he looked at me and said, I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I'm going to affect lives with this. And I've held that in my heart for all these years and tried to tell his story as often as I can so that he does continue affecting lives.
Well, that's beautiful. And he ultimately succumbed to prostate cancer. Do you have an affiliation with an organization in regards to promoting, routine checks, things like that, to try to stay ahead of it?
I do. I sit on the board for Prostate On-Site Project, which is an organization based out of Mesa that does mobile prostate screenings for men all over the state. And, it is just important for men to get screened to make sure that they have a baseline at 40. Younger if they have a family history or if they're African American.
Mm-hmm.
Doctors said that Tim's cancer was growing in him from the time he was 35. So in my mind, any time after 30 is a great time to request your doctor run that PSA test, and just make sure that you know what your numbers are and you're staying on top of it. Cancer is a tricky thing and can happen to anyone, so we all need to be mindful.
Absolutely, and it doesn't matter if you're wearing that badge or that vest. You are never so tough that you can beat something like that. So early screening is very important.
Yep.
So thank you, Autumn, for all that you do and for sharing your message today. And enjoy those beautiful little kiddos when they come home from school.
Thank you. Yes.
All right. Thanks, Autumn. Our takeaway today is simply to make a difference. Tim's life was cut short, as you heard the story that Autumn just told us. And even though it was cut short, she's continuing to do amazing things. And she travels around promoting individuals to get early screening for prostate cancer. And with her story, it is powerful. And she's able to do this and make a difference in other people's lives. And we hope today that you make a difference in someone's life as well. Thank you so much for your time today, and if you were impacted by this story, we would sure hope that you would subscribe to our podcast. And even more so, if you could write a review, that really helps us be seen on iTunes and other avenues, and we want to make sure that these stories get out to the masses. We think it's important. Also, be sure to check out thecallpod.com, because you can see associated videos or links and stories, pictures associated with these individuals, which is pretty neat. So continue to pay it forward. Thank you for your time today, and be sure to check back in and download our next episode. Until then, be safe.